So, Sheikh, tell me a little bit about like the inspirational people that you came into contact with and you studied with, and the teachers and the leaders, and who were some of the great people that really changed who you were, and what was it about them that really impressed you and that you learned from?
Well, I would say, the top two amongst the list really were Sheikh Nasruddin al-Albani and his approach to the hadith being the most important element for reforming the ummah. That we need to get back to the hadith, because the problem was people had gotten away from hadith into culture, into scholastic fiqh, which had lost its connection and became something else, which was not intended, which led to the split up of the madhabs and the differences which occurred. And the only way to remove all of that was basically to get back to the sources, and the source was the Quran and the Hadith. So the Quran everybody agreed on, and basically people would always refer to Quran. But Hadith, this was the area which was somewhat cloudy. The scholarship, Hadith scholarship, had gone to a very low point, by the end of the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. That period had gone to a very low point. Only a few scholars in India, had kept some of this alive. They continued to teach and to write, and some in Syria, some in Egypt. So there were Muslims in different areas, but it wasn't all together. It was indifferent. So I think Sheikh Nasir, basically brought that hadith first kind of approach, after Quran, because even for the Quran, if you don't have the hadith to guide you with the Quran, then the Quran alone, you can go here, there, anywhere and everywhere, right? Hadith was the means of putting the Quranic message in its proper context, because that's the Prophet ﷺ living the Quran. He was the living version. So the hadith being his lifestyle, his sunnah, his way, then that needed to be held on to as firmly as possible, along with the Quran, of course. So he brought that element and pushed that element. There were others, around that time, at the same time, but he became I think the most notable, especially because of his writings. There maybe have been others who were more knowledgeable, like Sheikh Shankiti, for example, who Sheikh Nasr admitted, knew more, memorized more. He could draw. His memory was, it was like IBM, computer, able to catch all that knowledge and, spit it back out in a second. But he didn't write. So if you look to see where the writings of, Sheikh Muhammad Amin al-Shankiti, where are his writings, you hardly find anything. He is like Ahmed ibn Hanbal, didn't write. His son wrote and others wrote, but he didn't write. But it didn't make him a lesser scholar than Imam Shafi'i or Imam Malik, etc. So the point is that he became a focus for me in my studies. Actually, we all gravitated towards him. I spent a lot of time, going to his lectures, etc. And his leading student in Medina, let's not say his leading student everywhere, was Sheikh Muqbil. And he had advised me, Sheikh Nasr al-Bani, had advised me to study takhrij of hadith with Sheikh Muqbil, because this was the skill which would give the scholar or the uh, student of knowledge the means to distinguish between the authentic and the inauthentic, because Quran we didn't have any issue about inauthentic, but the Sunnah there is this issue of weak hadith, fabricated hadiths, etc., etc. So that was the tool that was necessary to have been mastered and understood, to be able to make that distinction. So I studied, with Sheikh Muqbil in his home, Takhrij al-Hadith and so and so, So he was also, I used to attend his khutbah because Sheikh Nasir by that time, came on occasions. He came on the Hajj, he came during Ramadan, so he was not there all the time. He had been a teacher in Medina, but by the time we got there, he had just left and had gone back to Jordan, actually. Instead of Syria, had gone to Jordan. So you could say that Sheikh Muqbil, he was there all the time. He was the Imam. He would lead the khutbah. He'd give the khutbah of Jummah and so in the what was referred to as the Harra al-Sharqiyya. This was the area outside of Medina where many of his students, Sheikh Nasr's students, gathered and studied. And Sheikh Muqbil was sort of the leading student there. So I used to go to his khutbahs regularly and listen to him. So he was an example of khataba. He was a very powerful khatib. Sheikh Nasr, he was the scholar who will give you the explanation and so and so. But Sheikh Muqbil was a fiery khatib. So he was. I could say he became an example to me, of how to put ideas together, and deliver it in a way which would, reach the people.